We're here today with a Canadian author of numerous books on politics, on the civil service in New Brunswick and Canada, on economic development, regional development. We're here with Dr. Donald Savoie. Bonjour, Donald Savoie.
Bonjour, Maurice.
You have written very interesting biographies about very famous, very important businessmen in Canada and the Maritimes, Irving, McCain, Bragg. And now you just launched a book about a political figure, a very important political figure, an Acadian, not only in New Brunswick politics, but in Canadian politics, a former premier of New Brunswick, a former senator, Premier Louis Robichaud. Why was it important for you to write this book?
I owe this book to Louis Robichaud. I felt a debt because Louis Robichaud opened the world to Acadians, me included. Without Louis Robichaud and what he did, I would not be where I am today. I would not have done what I did. He gave us the infrastructure to do what we wanted to do to pursue our dream. So I owe it to Louis Robichaud, number one. Number two, he changed the province literally. The province 1960 versus the province 1970, totally different in many ways. Third, he was a personal friend. We were very close. We played many golf games together. I got to enjoy him very much, his presence, his friendship. He was a special politician that I'm very fond of. And at the end, I thought about I wanted to write a book about Louis for a long time. I didn't think I could be objective, and I'm not. And I say that in the preface. This is, if you're looking for something negative about Louis, go read it somewhere else. So I did it because I owed it to him, and I think New Brunswick, as a province, owes a lot to Louis Robichaud.
For the young people that are listening to us, even maybe older people who have not really known Louis Robichaud, what kind of man was Louis Robichaud?
Louis was a very special person. First, and people will be surprised by this, but he was very shy. But he was not timid. There's a big difference between being shy and timid. Because he told me at one point that he was shy. I said, Louis, you shy? He's a great orator. I said, that's theater. He said, I'm basically very shy. I asked his sister, was Louis shy? She said, yes, he was very shy. So the question for me was, how can somebody who says he's very shy, how will he do what he did? He challenged the status quo in politics, in education, in business, in economics, in federalism. He challenged the status quo on every sphere. So he was a politician with great courage who would not back away from a good fight. Shy? Maybe. Timid? No. And he took on many powerful forces to do what he felt needed that had to be done. And one thing that I would people to know about Louis Robichaud, he never, ever did it for himself. He did not have an outsized ego. He did not have any economic interests. He never benefited in economic way from having been premier. He did it for New Brunswick, truly. Now, today is a bit more of a cynical age. People say, well, now, come on. But it is actually true. He did it for the province. He did it to change the province. He had a purpose, a very central purpose. And imagine if a young Acadian at the age of 33 becoming premier, back in 1960, where Acadians were best left on the farm, where Acadians had no access to education beyond grade 8, essentially. When even our early age schools were not very well endowed, he decided to change that totally. And he captured the moment by saying equal opportunity. He felt that people from northern New Brunswick should have the same opportunity to succeed as people from southern New Brunswick. And one thing he told me, he told others too, but he told me many times, that what he did was not just for Gloucester County, but it was also for rural New Brunswick that didn't have any opportunities to grow and to prosper. So for him, it was a very, very ambitious agenda, wide-ranging, and he pursued it with gusto.
If you're not a student of history of New Brunswick, you don't really realize that in the 60s, the early 60s, when Louis Robichaud becomes the first Acadian elected premier of New Brunswick with many Acadians in his cabinet. Schools, we have hundreds of schools, hundreds of school districts. We have many little Acadian universities, colleges. We don't have official bilingualism, the hospitals, so many things that he and his government are gonna change. Where did this sort of mission came from? Almost a vocation. Where did it come from? This fire inside of him to transform New Brunswick into a modern society.
Maurice, you're absolutely correct. In 1959, New Brunswick was a backward society. Let's be clear about that. A major project in 1959 would be building a bridge. A major project in 1959, it was a major was building the Beechwood Dam. That was major. Louis Robichaud came to power and said, no, that's not major. We're not going to grow this province by doing that. So Mactaquac, 20 times the size of Beechwood. University of Moncton did not exist. The public service had a staff of about 2,600, 2,200. They were mostly clerks. They did exactly what the premier wanted them to do, just build that school and send the bill here and we'll pay it. It was archaic. And Louis decided, no, we're going to join the modern era and New Brunswick is going to come with me kicking and screaming if it has to, but it's coming. So there was no turning back. He was determined. You know, think about this, 5'5", 5'6", from rural New Brunswick, fresh out of university, says, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to change the province. It's amazing. We don't see that today. But back then, he felt this mission that New Brunswick was backward and he was going to do something about it.
We see it in your book. We read it in your book in a very vivid fashion that Louis Robichaud, who's known for many people as Petit Louis because of his height, both on the Acadian side and on the Anglophone side. He was a man that you could really talk to, a great orator, really sort of being able to get crowds on their feet. But there was also a lot of opposition. You just said that he wanted to bring New Brunswick into the modern world, maybe kicking and screaming, but there was kicking and screaming in New Brunswick with his reforms. How did he react, and how did he realize those reforms, even with that opposition?
There was an incredible amount of kicking and screaming, to the point that I don't think people today would understand the amount of the sustained opposition to what he wanted to do, because he challenged the status quo in every area. He challenged in education, in economics, in politics. He challenged everything. He wanted to change the world. And so think of the opposition. Think of people, when they saw Louis Robichaud coming in and wanting to change, they were going to lose things. Fredericton, Moncton, St. John, they saw themselves as the big losers. In terms of the media was harsh on Louis Robichaud, harsh on his family. He had to have police protection. At the middle of the night, there was some noise outside, and his children told me they didn't know. They were afraid. One of his sons told me that he went to school and he was beaten up more than once because he was Louis Robichaud's son. So that's the environment that he saw, but he never backed down. And he never backed down because he was convinced, absolutely convinced, that what he was doing was the right thing to do, and what he was doing was for the good of New Brunswick. It was never about himself. We don't see that very often now in modern politicians. But for Louis, it was never about him. It was about changing society to make it better, and he went at it with no idea of backing away from it.
In his very, very rich and plural legacy, he says, and you say it in the book, that his proudest achievement was the creation of l'Université de Moncton in 1963 with a very good friend of his, Father Clément Cormier, who becomes the first rector, first president of the université. Why was this very important for him?
Louis Robichaud, I think if you go back, it's difficult for today's generation to appreciate this, but if you go back in 1950s, education was the key to success, absolute key to success. If you didn't have a solid education, you worked as a labor in the construction industry or you moved to the New England states. In order to be successful at whatever you wanted to do, you had to have a good education. And for Louis Robichaud, what was lacking, and a central part of his equal opportunity was education. And for him, having 3 or 4 little classical colleges dotted along the Acadian coast was not enough. It didn't answer the call. And so he said, the University of Moncton is going to change this. And absolutely, he told me more than once that the one thing that was his legacy, and when shortly before he passed away, and I see this in the book, he asked to see me if I would organize his funeral. It was a very painful moment for me. And I said, well, Louis, I would, sure. And he said, can you do it on the campus of the University of Moncton? He wanted his funeral to be here, not in the church, at the University of Moncton. For him, and I remember coming on campus with him more than once, and a story I like to tell. There was this gentleman from Sussex, middle-aged. He had a son, 12, 13 years old, and he saw me with Louis. He came to me, didn't go to Louis. He said, do you think Louis would shake hand with my son? I don't see why not. Louis was shocked. I said, sure, he came over. And afterwards, this gentleman from Sussex said to me, you know, I want one day for my son to say, I shook hand with Louis Robichaud. And that is a definition of a rock star.
And you're right. You talk about him as sort of a rock star. I remember in 2003, the 40th anniversary of the creation of the University of Moncton. There's a big celebration at the CEPS, the big sports building on the Moncton campus, which bears Louis Robichaud's name. And Robichaud was the guest of honor. And the students, the employees, the personnel, when he came in and when he spoke, people were just as if they were in political campaigns of the 60s when he was going around the province. What would you like young people today and newcomers today, they arrive in New Brunswick, what would you like them to know and to remember about Louis Robichaud?
I would like them to appreciate that because of Louis Robichaud, they're able to do whatever they want to do. They're able to pursue their dream. Because Louis Robichaud gave the infrastructure, the programs, the capacity for every New Brunswicker to pursue his or her dream. That is what Louis Robichaud did. That's his legacy. Whether it's the high schools all over the province, whether it's the University of Moncton, whether it's the economic growth that he stimulated, whatever it is because of Louis that we now have the capacity to do whatever we want to do. If we're not successful in life, it's not because of Louis. It's because of the person looking in the mirror. Louis gave opportunity to everybody.
Donald Savoie, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you for having me, Maurice. Merci.